this finds you well. You know the drill. Go to the outline and let's get rolling. So today we are going to officially transition from talking about the colonists to talking about Americans. We are going to finish up the conversation about the causes of the American Revolution, and we're going to talk about the Declaration of Independence, and if you're lucky, maybe I'll tell you another James Otis story. So let's just review a tiny bit. So previously on American history, we talked about sort of the ratcheting tensions. We talked about how the Stamp Act leads to the Townsend Acts and the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party and the Intolerable Acts and all these things, one brick laid on top of the other, leading to growing and growing tensions that's eventually going to spill over into a shooting war caused by the colonists declaring their independence from England and thus becoming Americans. So the last thing we talked about was the aftermath of the Boston Tea Party, and the reaction to that was the Intolerable Acts. Well, the reaction to the Intolerable Acts was something called the First Continental Congress. Now, you can argue that the origins of American self-government and sort of this, the United States goes back to the Stamp Act Congress, but the First Continental Congress is more of a direct line. It's a straight line from the First Continental Congress to the U.S. Congress today. And this was a reaction to the Intolerable Acts. And they had a playbook, right? Every time England did something, the colonists would sort of react to it by doing what? They would do a boycott. Check. We're going to do a boycott, non-importation. They would petition England. Check. They're going to petition England, and say, you're not treating us fairly. You should treat us better. Boycott, petition, protests. We declare our own rights. We have a military buildup. I put military buildup in there in quotes because, look, we live in a country right now that spends more on the military than the next 9 countries combined. In the 1700s, an American military buildup is, hey, you might want to save some gunpowder. We're not building F-22s and aircraft carriers and stuff like that. And the other thing the First Continental Congress does is something that every meeting does. I don't know if you've ever been in a meeting, and if you haven't, I am so jealous. I hate meetings. I don't think anybody likes meetings. But the one thing that meetings always seem to accomplish, and really mostly only just one thing, and that is when to have the next meeting, right? Have you ever sat through a meeting and you're like, oh my God, this is the most boring, pointless exercise ever. And yet the last thing you're always told to do is, all right, take out your planner or take out your phone. We're gonna schedule our next meeting. This thing that just crushed your soul? Yeah, we're gonna do that again. So, let's see where we can fit this in on the schedule. So the First Continental Congress is a reaction to the Intolerable Acts. The colonists were getting pretty good at this. There's a decade or so of, this playbook of petitioning, protesting, boycotting. And in between this meeting in the fall of 74 and the next meeting in Philly in the spring of 75, a huge intervening event occurred. It's called Lexington and Concord. Lexington and Concord is when English troops march from Boston towards the cities of Lexington and Concord. The idea is that they're going to go after Sam Adams and John Hancock. The way England saw it, and I think they were wrong, but the way England saw it was this rebellion, this anxiety, this tension was caused by just a few rabble-rousers. It wasn't widespread. And they were right in the sense that it probably wasn't widespread throughout the colonies just yet, but it was certainly widespread throughout Boston and Massachusetts. So they're going to arrest Sam Adams, they're going to arrest John Hancock, and they think by arresting sort of the provocateurs, they will sort of, puncture the balloon and kind of deflate this rebellious, riotous kind of spirit. Now, this is where, if you know anything about Paul Revere, listen, my children, and you shall hear about the midnight ride of Paul Revere, one, if I land, two, if I see. Look, the reason why Paul Revere is because a poem is written by some dude and is not very historically accurate. But this is sort of the story that relates to that. The British are coming, the British are coming. And so there was colonial militias called the Minutemen. And they were basically, the idea was that they would be ready to fight in a minute. They'd grab their musket or their rifle and they'd grab their gunpowder and their bullets and bang, they're off and ready. And so the colonists got a heads up. We knew the British were coming. And this was the first time shots were fired. Shots were fired at both Lexington and Concord. And as the British troops go back to Boston, they are harassed constantly by not only the Minutemen and the colonial militia, but just by the average colonists, farmers, as the British troops would march on the road back to Boston, farmers would sort of grab a rifle, hide behind a tree, wait for the British troops to march by, and take a few pot shots at the English troops. And this was death of 1,000 paper cuts. The English suffered 3 times the casualties the colonists did in these skirmishes, even though the colonists never really presented itself as a formal army. That quote from the English general is really telling and kind of informs not only the lead up to the revolution, but much of the fighting in the revolution. So let's go through it. During the whole affair, the affair meaning Lexington and Concord, during the whole affair, the rebels attacked us in a very scattered, irregular manner, but with perseverance and resolution. Nor did they ever dare to form into a regular body. Indeed, they knew too well what was proper to do so. Whoever looks upon them as an irregular mob will find himself very much mistaken. What does that mean? What that means is the colonists and eventually the American army, during the Revolution, they were never a great army. They didn't do what was proper. They fought in a very scattered, irregular way. However, they fought with perseverance and resolution. And this English general got it. But most of the English generals, most of the English officers, most of the English officials and politicians during the Revolution never got it. They would always look at the colonists and early Americans and go, "You're terrible soldiers," and they weren't wrong. But what they didn't factor in is that there's a difference between being a soldier and a fighter. And although the colonists and the early Americans were not great soldiers, they got better as the war went on. They were great fighters. They fought with perseverance, resolution. They had learned those guerrilla tactics, those creative, intelligent tactics from the Native Americans. They applied them against England, and England never adapted. And there's a phrase I mentioned before that I'm very fond of, and that is adapt or die. And England never adapted. And so, spoiler alert, that's one of the huge reasons why the colonists / early Americans won. So you have the First Continental Congress, you have Lexington and Concord. This is now, it's not a revolution, but blood has been spilled. The Second Continental Congress meets in May of 75. And the Olive Branch Petition, I think you know what that is, an olive branch. I don't know why it means this, but olive branch, you extend the olive branch of peace. And so we basically say to England, and because neither side wants a war. The colonists sure as hell don't want a war. No sane person thinks we'd beat England. England, especially the middle class, they don't want a war with the colonies. They're making a ton of money. Everybody wants this to work out. It's like a relationship. We don't need to get a divorce. We can go to therapy. We can go to counseling or something. And so we send an olive branch petition, and we send the Declaration of Causes of Necessity of Taking Up Arms, which is basically like, here's what happened. This is our side of the story. And like I mentioned previously, it's not like there's one monolithic England. There's the king, and then there's the parliament, and then there's the English middle class. And the king is the one that is really sort of aggravated. And it's like, F you guys. And so the king takes all this olive branch petition, the Declaration of Causes, all that kind of stuff, and he throws it in the round file. Round file means trash. And he goes, screw you. I declare you an open rebellion. Another thing that happens at the Second Continental Congress is that they name George Washington commander of the colonial troops. And George Washington, man, does he have his hands full. So George Washington is an aristocrat. He's wealthy. He's from Virginia. He's one of the most respected men in all of the colonies. But he's a Virginian, and he's an aristocrat, and he's not used to dealing with people that question him. And when he rolls up to Massachusetts to try to, get these militia members from Massachusetts who grew up in the Puritan town hall, they get to vote, they get to have a say in things. When he tries to sort of get them into shape to be an army, it is oil and water. It is, this is two worlds, very different worlds colliding. The Massachusetts militia guys, they were like, we should have a say in this. We should have a vote. And we kind of come and go as we please. And George Washington is not used to people questioning him. He's not used to people coming and going. In the military, that's not how it works. You're not allowed to just kind of go, hey, I'm going to go home for a few months, but I'll be back. Don't worry. That's not how the military works. And so not only did what becomes the U.S. Army need more discipline, but George Washington needed more flexibility. And they kind of met each other in the middle. To George Washington's credit, he wasn't my way or the highway. He was like, I got to make this work. And so we're kind of trying to get our stuff together in terms of our military, but there's still not, nobody's declared a revolution yet. Nobody's declared independence, but we're getting very, very close. A month later, arguably the first battle of the American Revolution takes place. It actually took place at Breed's Hill, but it's been called Bunker Hill so long, I don't know what to tell you. Like, does it matter that it's actually Breed's Hill, not Bunker Hill? I don't think so. The battle happened at Bunker Hill. The colonists are defending the high ground. England is attacking the high ground. And, in a war context, you always want to be defending the high ground. You never want to be attacking uphill. But that's precisely what England does. And England has, more discipline. They're a better equipped army. It's a bigger army. And so they do one attack wave up the hill. It fails. They do another attack wave up the hill. And the colonists are beginning to run out of gunpowder, run out of bullets. And so this is when, if you saw the old Schoolhouse Rock, this is where, don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. That third attack, England overwhelms the colonial troops because they just, the colonial troops don't have enough numbers. They don't have enough gunpowder. They don't have enough bullets. And eventually, England actually takes that hill. So technically, England wins. But it's a Pyrrhic victory. And what a Pyrrhic victory means is that, yes, you won, but you won at such a cost that it almost feels like a loss, or it doesn't almost feel like it. It is a loss. England suffered twice as many casualties, all that to get a hill that really does not have much strategic importance. As an English general said, quote, "It was a dear-bought victory. Another such would have ruined us." In other words, yeah, this is great. We won, but if we keep winning, we're going to lose. It's kind of like, I don't know. If you're a football fan, let's say you're a Chiefs fan. Congratulations on your Super Bowl victory. It was a well-earned victory, and Chiefs are a hell of a team. Pat Mahomes is a hell of a player. Congratulations. Hopefully one day I will experience what that feels like to have your team win a Super Bowl, but I'm a Cleveland Browns fan, so I'm not going to hold my breath. But here's an example of a Pyrrhic victory. Let's say the Chiefs played let's say they played the Las Vegas Raiders. Still, as a lifelong football fan, having said Oakland Raiders so many times, or LA Raiders, Las Vegas Raiders. Okay, so let's say the Chiefs play the Las Vegas Raiders at Allegiant Field. And let's say the Chiefs win. Great. But let's say in the course of that victory, Pat Mahomes breaks his leg and is out for the rest of the season. That is a Pyrrhic victory, right? Yes, technically your team won, but if you're a Chiefs fan, I think you'd go, you know what? I'd rather have lost and kept the best player in the NFL on the field for the rest of the season than to have won and lose Mahomes, right? So anyway, that's the way to think of Bunker Hill. That's the way to think of a Pyrrhic victory. And if you look at the next thing on the outline, what's he doing there? Hold on a second, James Otis. All right, so this is a great James Otis story, and there's a lot of great James Otis stories, and here's one. So James Otis, by 1775, had, to use an expression, he'd gone round the bend, right? His mental illness had got to the point where he really wasn't able to function without the help of his family. And so he'd crash at different family homes, and the place he stayed often was his sister's home, Mercy Otis Warren. And he would sit on the front porch and kind of wave at people as they'd go by. But with the Battle of Bunker Hill, there was a bunch of people going by to go fight for the colonists at the Battle of Bunker Hill. And he's sitting on his porch. His sister doesn't realize, what he's doing. And he's sitting on the porch and he kind of sees the people going by and he goes, I wonder what they're doing. And so he wanders off. He borrows a rifle and he goes with the people to the Battle of Bunker Hill. He fights in the Battle of Bunker Hill. He fights, by all accounts, bravely in the Battle of Bunker Hill. I mean, the difference between brave and crazy, I guess, is a thin line. And, it's one of those things where, as a historian, when you go through people's diaries or journals, and you come across these journal entries like, so, we were fighting the English and da-da-da, and I might be crazy, but I could have swore I saw James Otis, right? James Otis wanders off from his sister's house, borrows a rifle, fights bravely in the Battle of Bunker Hill, gives the rifle back, goes back home, and to my knowledge, his family, Mercy Otis Warren, never realized that he had wandered off. She never realized he fought in the Battle of Bunker Hill. So you and I know something that his family never knew, that James Otis fought at the Battle of Bunker Hill. All right, so that's the last James Otis story. Or is it? The war is technically the war has started, but we haven't declared revolution yet. We need to get to that point, but we're not quite there. Patrick Henry. Patrick Henry was a Virginian. He was a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses. He was, it looks like from that picture, he's a, what do you call those people? Steampunk? Don't those look like steampunk goggles? Anyway, Patrick Henry was a great orator, and he was, I guess the word you could say is he was hyperbolic, right? He kind of went over the top when he said things. And so you know this quote. So let's go through it a little bit. The battle, sir, is not to the strong alone. It is to the vigilant, the active, the brave. Besides, sir, we have no election. If we are base enough to desire it, it is now too late to retire from the contest. There is no retreat but into submission and slavery. Our chains are forged. Their clanking may be heard on the plains of Boston. The war is inevitable, and let it come. I repeat, sir, let it come. It is in vain, sir, to